10 seconds.
Thank you, ma'am.
10, 9. Okay, I'm broadcasting live now.
Thank you. Good evening. Welcome to the Costa Mesa Planning Commission meeting for Monday, July 13th. I call the meeting to order and ask everyone to stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thanks very much, everybody. Julie, roll call, please.
Chair Jericho,
Here.
Vice Chair Harlan,
Here.
Commissioner Colbert,
Present.
Commissioner Perkins,
Here.
Commissioner Russell,
Here.
Commissioner Torje,
Here.
Commissioner Zick.
Here.
Great, thank you very much, Julie. Announcement tonight, in order to minimize the spread of the COVID-19 virus, Governor Newsom has issued executive orders that temporarily suspend requirements of the Brown Act, which allows Planning Commission members to attend Planning Commission meetings telephonically. Given the health risks associated with COVID-19, the City Council chambers will be closed to the public until further notice. Members of the community can participate in tonight's meeting a couple of ways. You are encouraged to observe the Planning Commission meeting live on Costa Mesa TV, Spectrum Channel 3, and AT&T Uverse Channel 99, or online at youtube.com/Costa Mesa. If you want to participate in tonight's Zoom webinar, you can find the log information on tonight's agenda, which is located on the city's website. If you also want to participate by telephone, you can dial 1-669-900-6833, and the webinar ID is 929-7896-3127, and the password is 355330. Also, during public comment, if you wish to make a comment during one of the items and you're on the telephone, you press *9 and you'll be placed in the queue, and you wait till the city clerk calls your name. Also, members of the public can participate during the meeting by email by sending comments to pcpubliccomments@costamesaca.gov. Again, that's pcpubliccomments@costamesaca.gov. And with that, we'll move to public comments, and I see we have two attendees, Ms. Green. One of them is a member of the public. I don't know if that member of the public wishes to speak during public comment or for an agenda item.
Mr. Chair, so I'm going to, the name is Mike Gankar. If you'd like to speak on an item not on the agenda, could you please raise your hand and then we'll allow you to speak.
Okay, so I'm assuming, Mr. Gankar, that you're wanting to speak on an agenda item later on?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Julie.
I did want to note that we have received one written comment from Al Morelli that has been provided to the commission and made a part of the record.
Thank you, Julie. And I will note that I did receive Mr. Morelli's email comment related to Target. And so I do have that information. I know that all the other commissioners will, and I actually will be following up on that. Okay, so seeing no other public comments, we'll close public comment and move to planning commissioner comments. And we'll begin with Commissioner Torje.
Glad to be here with all of you tonight. My main comment tonight was just to make sure that we follow up with Mr. Morelli's comment about Target. And, you know, he was very vocal and engaged as part of that process. And so I want to make sure that if we've approved something and if we've made an agreement with Target, that we're able to follow through with it and especially address the comments provided. Other than that, I'm looking forward to our discussion tonight, a good code cleanup, as well as some of the old business on the agenda that we've been discussing for a few weeks. So thank you, everyone.
Great, thank you, Commissioner Tourget. Commissioner Russell.
I don't have any comments tonight. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Perkins.
Great, thank you. As always, excellent to be here tonight. Just wanted to mention on the COVID-19, the numbers that we've been seeing in the last couple of weeks have just been staggering. And I really hope that we can all come together as one and try to help each other get through these very tough times. So many among us are vulnerable to this disease. Too many have already died. More will die, and many more will be left with horrible consequences like heart and lung and neurological damage. The human costs of this disease are staggering, and only through not allowing the virus to find new hosts can we reduce the toll. So let's all be careful out there. Let's all reduce our contact with folks not in our immediate household, and let's help all of our community, especially the most vulnerable among us, to get through this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner Perkins. Commissioner Zick.
I don't have any comments tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Colbert.
No comments, just one comment. I just wanted to say that my thoughts and prayers are with the Mandela family who experienced the loss of Zendezi Mandela, who was the daughter of Nelson and Winnie Mandela in South Africa today. So I just wanted to say that we're praying with them and thinking about them at this time of their loss.
Okay, Commissioner Colbert, thank you very much. Vice Chair Harlan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's good to be with everyone this evening. I wanted to echo Commissioner Tourget's comments about Target and the conditions of approval. Likewise, I've been contacted by Mr. Morelli, and I think we're obligated to follow up to make sure that the applicant is in fact adhering to the conditions. Secondly, I just wanted to make a public service announcement. Every Saturday at the fairgrounds, Power One Foundation is hosting a food drive. I participated this weekend, and it is incredibly distressing how many people are in need in our community. And the demand is so high. But on the other hand, it was also very heartening to see so many people come out and volunteer, get to know each other. I mean, it's still a community event, and I appreciated being part of it. So moving forward, Saturdays at the fairgrounds, anybody who needs food, please come by. There's no questions asked, drive through. And for those who are interested, you can look on the Power of One Foundation Instagram or website. Those are all my comments.
Thank you very much. I want to echo Commissioner Tourget's comments and other commissioners' comments who mentioned Target and Mr. Morelli's email. I do recall when we had that item before us, and the applicant was very genuine about his interest in being a responsible neighbor. I want to make sure that they are. So I will be following up with Mr. Curtis so I can communicate to Mr. Morelli and also to Target to see if they are indeed complying with their conditions of approval. So the other thing is, as I'm sure everybody is aware by now, about 6 hours ago, Governor Newsom handed down essentially a rollback of the openings that have been occurring relative to the COVID pandemic. And the governor's statewide order closes, and this is statewide, dine-in restaurants, wineries and tasting rooms, movie theaters, family entertainment, zoos and museums, card rooms, and additionally bars, brew pubs, breweries, and pubs must close all operations, both indoor and outdoor, statewide. What I did wanted to clarify, there was a little bit of confusion in Costa Mesa that I noted both on social media and some comments that I've gotten from some other members of the community, was that in counties that are on the state's monitoring list, and as of today, 30 of the state's 58 counties are on the monitoring list, including Orange County. The following businesses must close: fitness centers, worship services, offices for non-essential sectors, personal care services, nail salons and tattoo parlors, barbershops, and indoor malls. There was some concern in the community that I'd heard of was, well, if these closures apply to counties who've been on the monitoring list for 3 consecutive days. Some people thought that the closures were happening for only 3 days, and the closures are indefinite until the governor issues an order rescinding them. So to be clear, the closures that pertain to counties on the state monitoring list, those closures are in effect until the governor rescinds them. And those are counties that have been on the state list, monitoring list for 3 consecutive days. So Orange County is one of those. So I just wanted to make sure that that was clear. Beyond that, I don't have any additional comments. So we'll move consent calendar. There are no items on the consent calendar tonight, and that will take us to public hearing. So Julie, please, public hearing item number 1.
Public hearing item number 1, a resolution recommending that the City Council give first reading to an ordinance amending Title 13 of the Costa Mesa Municipal Zoning Code to clean up internal inconsistencies between various chapters of the zoning code and to conform to recent revisions to and requirements of state law, Code Amendment CO-2020-02. This item was continued from the June 22nd, 2020 Planning Commission meeting. Please note that we have received 1 written comment from Mike Lingle that has been provided to the commission and made a part of the record.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you for identifying Mr. Lingle's electronic correspondence today, which I received, and I'm assuming all other commissioners received. Mrs. Shoddy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, commissioners. It's nice to see all of you. I will start with sharing my screen. So this code amendment before you this evening has been in the making for the past at least 2 to 3 years. So every time we have an application, we have inquiries from the public, we try to keep track of them and see if there are any inconsistencies in the code. So our plan is to bring this forward maybe once a year or twice a year, just so that we have consistency between our interpretation throughout the year and what's in the zoning code. So some of the issues included are internal inconsistencies between chapters, references to outdated terms or information, and imprecise language which has been interpreted and applied but not clarified in the zoning code, and several state regulations that have been updated maybe through an ordinance but not in the actual zoning code. It affects mostly most of the chapters, starting from chapter 1, which is the definitions, all the way to chapter 9, which includes the wireless antennas, and I'll go through each one of them briefly. With respect to chapter 1, definitions, one of the first things that we looked at was the property line. We wanted to clarify that the property line does not include any future dedications or easement, and it is the ultimate right-of-way. There's a change to the definition of the natural grade or finished grade. These two are identified in precise grading plans, and we review them just to make sure that conditions of approval are met. And one of them, the biggest one, is the 36-inch grading difference that's allowed by most of the conditions of approval. Bedroom count, we want to clarify that the office is also counted in the bedroom counts when it comes to parking requirements. We also looked at adding a new definition relative to specialty stores. These are small, maybe ethnic stores that provide a small food market with limited alcoholic beverage sales that are smaller than the convenience market. And their main goal is not sales of, convenience goods. Boarding house, this definition is changed to be consistent with the group home ordinances that were adopted in 2015. And finally, tandem parking, which needs to be consistent with the small lot ordinance and allows only 2 spaces in a row. Chapter 3 related to planning application. We're recommending streamlining single-story development in multiple family zones, as those have the lowest impact to the neighboring properties. We're also recommending a small reduction in the size of the garage through a minor modification. This is what we're proposing is a 5% reduction in the 20-foot dimension, which is about a foot. There's also lots of references to the redevelopment agency, which has been dissolved, so we would like to remove those references. There's also a cross-reference to special use permit, and that's per group home ordinances also that were adopted in 2015. Chapter 4 is the land use matrix. Couple of uses that we have been interpreting: permanent makeup. There's no specific definition, so those currently fall under tattoo parlors, which are subject to CUP, and it's our recommendation that these are typically ancillary uses to a beauty salon, and they could be allowed through a minor conditional use permit. Also, group counseling, the interpretation that's been that these fall under the same category as some studios or vocational schools, and they are subject to a minor conditional use permit. We also recommend adding a note relative to the emergency shelters that are operated by the city. There was one that was approved last year in the planned development industrial zone, and those do require a master plan, but in this case, we're asking that that requirement be left out. Chapter 5, residential development standard. The first one is a flush-mounted solar panel. The city's has been preempted by state law to not require any kind of subjective review when it comes to solar panels. Also, development standards that are not applicable to existing lots, such as lot width or dimensions. We're recommending that those be removed. There's also some cleaned up items with respect to small lot ordinance that are not applicable. Chapter 5, commercial and industrial development standards, allowing a minor increase in the building height, and that's intended for screening existing roof-mounted equipment. Other service uses, we added language similar to what's in the commercial zones with respect to uses within 200 feet of residential uses, generally related to noise, operating hours, and such. Also, general development standards. Minor conditional use permit do allow outdoor dining for restaurants. So with this, we are adding a shade structure. So if a restaurant is allowed to have outdoor dining and use the front setback or side setback area in the dining area, that they would be allowed to have a shade structure. With respect to open space in planned development, we clarified the definition of what's a patio or entryway to be not counted towards open space, and at the minimum 100 square foot of balcony be required for each unit. The floor area ratio table that's in the zoning code has had one mistake, so this is just correcting a mistake, and it needs to be consistent with the table that's in the general plan. Chapter 6, with respect to parking, we do have common interest development that are detached, and there's no specific parking standard in the zoning code currently. We've applied either the single family or the condo development parking standards. So this will clarify that if you have a detached 2-bedroom unit, that you're required 3 parking spaces, and anything over 3 bedroom would be the same as a single family or a total of 4 spaces. Also, guest parking in multiple family development where you have a driveway where it's designed as a traditional single family with a 2-car garage and a driveway in front of it. The code currently does not allow that parking to be counted towards guest parking. So this would allow those type of situations. Chapter 7, with respect to landscape requirements, the city, as well as all other cities in the state, are required to comply with the water efficient landscape requirements. Currently, our code does not require any review of R1 single family zones, any landscaping within those areas. So we are requiring that the visible setbacks be landscaped, and this will bring us into compliance with the state requirement as well. We've also seen an increase in the use of decomposite granite as ground cover, so we would like to have that option added to the code, and also installation of the artificial grass. We've been allowing it up to 50% through a zoning determination, and we would like that cleaned up in the code as well. With respect to sign standards, there was no specific requirement in terms of construction signs, so this change will make those consistent with other signs and real estate signs in the R1 zone, and also clarifies requirements related to flags that should be consistent with the state law and the cities. And lastly, in terms of antennas, we basically copied the same requirement for roof-mounted to pole-mounted antennas, so that the city has the ability to ask for more additional screening or camouflaging in review of those types of applications. So with respect to landscape requirements, one of the commissioners had the concern about requiring a certain number of trees or tree sizes for R1. So we are also offering this modified language if the commission is interested, so that the requirement is to ask for a combination of shrub, ground cover, or trees, and they would be, the R1 zone would be exempt from the tree counts that are applicable to other residential zones. So with all that, then we are recommending that the Planning Commission consider this code amendment as an exemption from the secret requirement. And also, just as any other code amendment, it is subject to approval by City Council through an ordinance. So we are recommending that the Planning Commission recommends this zoning code amendment to move forward. This concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chabi. Commissioners, do you have any questions of staff? Go ahead and raise your hand on the participant panel, please. Wow. There we go, 2. I'm going to go with Commissioner Colbert first. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chabi, for a great presentation. I think we've all been looking forward to this for some time. I have a couple of questions, and I will try to take them in order of the presentation. First question is related to, does this capture the previous amendments that we received periodically? In terms of, I know there are a couple of definitions that have appeared before the commission, specifically related to arcades and or axe throwing and or the small, like the medical devices structure. Are the definitions for those structures that we've had that had to come before commission, are they proposed to be included in this at all?
As it is for this round, they are not included. I think we take into account of how relevant it could be if it's just a one-time use or interpretation that may not be widely used, that we may keep that just as a separate and not included in the zoning code and leave it to the commission to decide in terms of those uses.
Okay, for the land use matrix, a couple of those uses that may not be captured, are we proposing to potentially add those maybe in another round, or does it require a substantial quantity for times before it comes before the commission before we consider it?
It does not require quantity, but I think our plan is to do this maybe twice a year, and I'll defer that to Jennifer. I don't understand the issue, but with the axe throwing, I'm sorry, I wasn't involved in that application.
Commissioner Colbert, I can add a few things. Our intention with this item was for this to really be sort of a first try at the low-hanging fruit in the code that is really bringing things into consistency for the most part and making some clarifications. As we get applications, we do look at our definitions and sort of make a decision as to whether it's a question that we have received multiple times and we feel that it needs to be clarified in the code as opposed to a one-time interpretation, as Minu mentioned. So we are looking at things like specialty uses like axe throwing and whether or not they should be defined, or whether we can just interpret that they fall into one of the land use categories that's already there. So that's our intention. If the commissioners have specific issues that they'd like to raise for us to take a closer look at in the next round of zoning code cleanups, please do, and we will do that.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is related to chapter 1. I think this was on page 3 of the staff report. I wanted to get a better understanding of the property line when determining residential setbacks. Does this mean that we will be starting from the curb, or would this mean we will be starting from the property line identified by the survey?
So typically the front or the side property line is measured not from the curb, it's measured from the right-of-way, which does not, so the curb, also the parkway is considered the right-of-way. The front property line could fall somewhere 7 or 8 feet from the curb. In some instances, this public services, either for the use of a sidewalk or an apron, may require a dedication or an easement. So we want to make sure that the ultimate property line is where the measurement is. So basically, when you have a parking space, you don't want to have the parking or the car overhang onto the sidewalk. So this will allow for that not to happen.
Okay. And so in chapter 5, on page 8 of the staff report, I am unfamiliar with the term ultimate setback. So that's kind of one of the clarifications that I think you gave me. But would the ultimate setback definition apply here when we're thinking about the awnings or extension of patios? Or would this be for the uses along like 17th Street with bars and patios, which right now are kind of like legal non-conforming? Would this just bring them into code compliance?
So yes, it will apply to those cases as well. We want to make sure that we don't have any structures overhanging into the public right of way. Correct.
Okay. And for offsite parking for chapter 6, page 9, I know we're proposing a new definition with tandem parking. The guest parking that's being proposed here, would tandem parking would that be the definition for that type of parking, or how would that work? I just want to understand how that definition, where it will be applicable.
So in terms of the guest parking in front of the garage, it's the same configuration as is an R1 zone when you have parking in front of the garage, and that's considered tandem in terms of having two cars parked behind one another. The third parking space, whether it's a garage, whether it's a tandem garage and one parking space, or whether it's a garage space and two parking, it's considered over what we allowed. So anything over 2 spaces, whether in a garage or a open space, would be considered a non-conforming.
Okay. And my next question related to that, based off your presentation, I wanted to better understand what was staff's motivation behind including the office in the parking count for given the proposal of we're trying to encourage multi-use, but that would increase the parking requirements for some communities. I just wanted to understand how that was concluded. How did we get there?
So there's been situations where you have maybe a home office that's very, it functions as a bedroom. So we want to make sure that we capture those. And there may be some proposals that have multiple offices. So we've had those situations as well. Basically, this would count every bedroom towards the parking, and whether it's an office or not. If it's an enclosed with an open with an opening or a door opening, then it would be considered a bedroom.
Okay. And my final question is related to the special use permits. I am a fan of those, so I'm glad to see that that's been proposed. In terms of the SUPs, will they require staff approval over the counter, or will they come before the commission depending on the type of use?
I'm going to defer that to Jennifer. I believe they're subject to approval by the Development Services Director.
Yes, that's correct. There's a separate section of the code that is dedicated to specifically to the processes applicable to group homes. So what we did in this particular code cleanup is just to reference that section of the code, and also to add the special use permit to our list of permitting processes. So this code amendment doesn't change the process at all. It just puts a pointer to an existing process. But Minu is correct. It's the Development Services Director who makes the decision on special use permits. And that's reflected in the table in the code cleanup.
Got it. I think that concludes my questioning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Colbert. Commissioner Perkins.
Great, thank you. So a couple, and I'll also try to go in order of this. One of the things I was wondering about is in the definition of grade, when we're trying to get at the idea of those grades, I noticed that it says that they are referenced in regard to a point, but what is the actual point that we're using? So finished grade is saying surface ground level at a stated location as it exists after completion of precise grading. I guess, what is the stated location and how would we figure that out?
So typically, state of location would be the natural grade. And most Costa Mesa is flat, so we hardly have these conditions where you have a slope lot, but most entitlements are requiring a 36-inch maximum retaining. So this is to ensure that the difference between the natural grade and the finished grade does not go over 36 inches unless it's a special circumstance.
Okay. Yeah, I guess when I'm looking at this, I guess I could see trying to get more precise, although I understand that that is obviously very complicated. I guess
Perkins, if I can add to what Minu provided, I did want to bring up here that this particular cleanup was intended really to provide a definition for a term that's used in the code where there wasn't one. But to your point about perhaps being able to be more detailed about where the finished grade is measured from. So for example, is it an average? Is it the lowest point? Is it the highest point? This is something that we apply at the staff level when we review the grading plan, but we don't disagree that it could be more detailed. Then we're happy to take a look at that and bring an item back to the commission as part of a separate cleanup.
Perfect, thank you. For garage parking, actually, that's for tandem parking, what I wanted to look at. I know Commissioner Colbert asked about that, and we're talking about parking like, 3 cars in a row, essentially, which is banned by the definition. The thing that I wanted to point out is that in at least a couple of sections of the code, we actually have it specifically allowing tandem parking. So in section 13-85D, I don't think it's actually in our staff report, but it's on page 608 of the code, where it talks about accessory dwelling units. It actually specifically allows tandem parking of 3 cars in a row. So it's saying parking may be provided as tandem parking on an existing driveway leading to a garage or carport, but must be in addition to any parking required for the single family residence. And it says tandem parking means that 2 or more automobiles are parked on a driveway or in any other location on a lot lined up behind one another. So I wanted to see how our definition is going to interact with this. Because especially for ADUs, it seems like adding additional parking, if it's required, can be excessive.
Commissioner Perkins, the accessory dwelling unit is going to be exempt from this requirement. Actually, the tandem parking is in the state code and the city would not be able to regulate it. That cleanup will also be reflected in the ordinance that we will be probably presenting to you within the next month. So ADUs would not be subject to this. Also, areas in the west side under the overlays do allow tandem parking. So this would be any property that's subject to just the strict residential zoning in the city.
Perfect, thank you. For I think it's on page 9 of the staff report, we're talking about the requirement to add balconies and or roof decks. And one question I had on this, and this was more during the presentation, how is this different from what we were doing before? I was trying to read our red line, and it seemed like before, to help me understand the change, we're saying now any planned development residential must require 100 square feet per unit above the first floor of either a balcony or roof deck. Whereas before, it was only required if they didn't have enough open space in the rest of the development. Is that what's actually?
Right, basically this clarifies how the developers had the ability to combine common space of open space and private open space. So this clarifies what's definitely private per dwelling, and the commission still has the ability to deviate from the standard in a different project setting if it's suitable for that specific project. Okay. But in any case, the private balconies would be required per dwelling.
And I guess the question that I had based on that is, one of the things that we've been talking a lot about here is affordable housing. And I guess I wanted to make sure that this change would not have an impact on the ability to build affordable housing, where I think potentially extra flexibility or not having to add extra things hanging out might help to reduce the cost of the construction and thus the affordability of it. So do we anticipate this adding development costs as a result?
I'm not an expert in that, but typically the balconies that are provided are within the footprint of the building. So I don't see that as an added cost, maybe just the decking that needs to be provided. The maintenance may be an added cost, but as far as the construction, I don't think that would be an added cost.
Okay. For the landscaping, would I be able to see the slide with the proposed changes? I will own up to being the commissioner who was having questions about that landscaping change.
Sure.
So I would like to see the proposal details that you had there, if possible.
Can you see it?
I can, thank you very much.
Okay.
And I was wondering what was being exempted from it. 1, 2, okay. So yeah, I guess my concern with this one and why I had brought up some questions was that especially that sections 13106A 1 and 2 have very stringent requirements for tree count and shrub count, and working from my own front yard, which is roughly 1,100 square feet, I would need to have 5 trees and 44 shrubs in my front yard. And I have a native front yard with multiple trees and shrubs, but those numbers are just kind of insane. So I appreciate this more flexibility that we have here. Just saying it should be a combination of this. One concern and one other area that trying to see what we have. But I know one other concern I have is like concerns for ground cover. Speaking biologically, the requirement to always have mulch or leaves on ground cover can sometimes lead to harms to native insects, especially say ground dwelling insects like bees. Actually, native bees often require bare dirt or bare sand to build their nests and have their life cycles complete. So sometimes that's in 13106 B. And so I wonder if we might want to also exclude that. But I like those proposals. I like that proposal much better than otherwise. I think we'd have many unintended consequences.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that to our attention.
And then on the turf exemption, again in that section, I noticed that in the proposed text of the code, you use the word yard. You could have up to 50% of the yard area be using artificial turf. In the presentation, I think you use the word landscaped area. And given that this chapter applies to all development, so this portion of the code applies to all developments, is there a difference in those two words? Because when I think of yard, I think of the connotation of residential only. So are we intending to allow artificial turf in all areas, which I would personally be fine with, or are we thinking this is just residential? What's the difference there?
I can think of at least one example that we've allowed it in multiple family residential in the perimeter landscaping, just because of the issues with the underground, like planting issues and underground utilities. So I think the intention is to apply it as requested, yes, in any zoning district.
Yeah. And I think another actual possible addition or change when I was going over it, it's table 13-2, which is on handwritten page 28. It's looking at the residential development standards, and it actually has a blanket ban on electrical outlets in attics. And I know from my own work on my own house that if you have heating or cooling appliances installed in the attic, there's actually a code requirement to install electrical outlets in the attic. So I don't know if it could be done in this code cleanup or a future one, but some statement in there not explicitly banning electrical outlets or allowing them when required by code seems like it might be a good idea.
We could certainly add that if it's required by building or fire code.
Great. And that's all my questions on the staff report. I have a couple of ideas for future code updates, but we can talk about that later. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Perkins, Commissioner Tourget, and then Commissioner Zick.
Thank you. I had 3 questions that have been whittled down to 1 based on previous commissioners' comments. I do want to make a quick I have a quick question on page 7, where we section B, talking about group counseling. And I remember this conversation from previous applications where we say that group counseling will have the same review process as trade or vocational school. And I remember the Planning Commission having conversations on that being, or I remember myself feeling like that was an odd alignment and that we didn't have something specific. And so I wanted to ask if it is within our purview to have, or what the process would be to actually have a section or a specific process for group counseling, or if that would violate any like state laws or pose any legal challenges.
I am going to defer that to Willa because she's worked more on those types of uses as a zoning administrator. Willa, are you there?
I am here, and I'm also going to defer to Tarquin, though, but my understanding is if we wanted to include group counseling as a separate item in the matrix, we could do that, and then we could define our own parking requirements for the group counseling as we wish. At the time, which was, I think, 2008, it was felt that the trade schools and that other rest of the category was the most similar use in the matrix. And that's why we used and applied that to the group counseling. But if we wanted to add another line in the matrix for group counseling and then come up with a parking requirement, that's something we can always do.
Okay.
Yes, and I think just to add to Willa's explanation, I think that the primary issue here is that staff looked at where group counseling seemed appropriate as a permitted use or as allowed through a minor conditional use permit. And we felt that the zoning districts that we would select for those were the same as schools and trade and vocational schools. And that's why we structured it the way that we did. But we can certainly add a line into the land use matrix if there's an idea that there should be different zoning districts. I think the parking question, though, is something that's probably a broader discussion. And as I recall from our last conversations about group counseling, it was the parking standard that was perhaps more of the issue, and just the idea that perhaps there should be more specific parking requirements for more specific uses or some sort of process that would allow for that discussion. So I think if we can keep the parking discussion separate from the land use matrix discussion, that's probably wise. But certainly if there's a concern with how we've structured it in the matrix, we can address that this evening.
So thank you so much, Willa and Jennifer. That was really helpful. A follow-up question from that. When, if not tonight, when would the matrix be updated? And I ask that because do we receive more applications for trade and vocational schools or for group counseling?
It's actually a bit of a combination. We have group counseling as well as trade and vocational schools throughout the city. So I'd say we receive roughly the same number, but that's a generalization. So in terms of when we can make the change, if there's an interest in having it be a separate line item, I think we can discuss that this evening and articulate that as part of the motion. The other option would be to sort of have commissioners articulate the information that they'd like us to consider, and in our next cleanup, we can include that change as part of our proposed ordinance. We have said that we intend to do these a few times a year or sort of as needed. Initially, as you can imagine, we've amassed quite a list of corrections that need to be made. The item before you this evening is not all of them, so we intend to bring a few of these before you in sort of rapid succession, more rapid succession than we would see in the future. So we can certainly include that as part of our next one, which we think will be probably before the end of the year is the idea.
Thank you. That's all my questions for tonight, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Tourget. Commissioner Zick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'll start by saying I appreciate the way you introduced this item as a cleanup of the Title 13, addressing inconsistencies, clarifications, corrections, as opposed to a series of rule changes. And I appreciate that because when people look at the subject of an item, it should tell them what it is, so they're not having to dig through a staff report and look for hidden gotchas that might change their world. And that wasn't your intention, and it isn't what you did. And so I appreciate that, which leads to my very first question. So a couple of commissioners have expressed some interest, it sounded to me like, where there are aspects of the Title 13 that they would like to see changed. And in terms of the process for doing that, could you just kind of briefly explain how it is that a commissioner could, or how the planning commission, maybe from process standpoint, could request staff to look at an aspect of the title that we would want changed, and then bring it forward to us on an agenda item to change it? Could you explain what that process would be?
Sure. So there's a couple of different types of changes that I think are important to draw a distinction between. First, if commissioners, through their review of this item tonight, notice other cleanup items that perhaps staff didn't see and you'd like to bring those to our attention, I think it's very appropriate to do that in your comments this evening. And those are things that staff will go back and take a look at the code and bring to you in our next cleanup item. There are other items that are really more of a wholesale look at policy. And for example, if there was a request to take a look at our parking standards in their entirety and study those perhaps and bring something back to the commission in the way of a recommendation, that would be something that is obviously an effort that we haven't anticipated. And my suggestion for something like that would be to articulate those in your comments this evening. And if you'd like to include them in the motion as well as a recommendation to the city council, that would be appropriate. And then the city council would direct staff to pursue such a policy amendment.
Okay, thank you for that. So the couple of questions I have about what's before us. My first question is on the staff report, page 8, where we're talking about building height, maximum building height. What I don't understand is, and let me predicate the question by referring to page 3, which defines building height as the distance from the finished grade to the highest point of the roof, including mechanical equipment and screening. So that's building height, all the way to the top of the roof, including mechanical equipment and screening. So on page 8, here's what I don't understand. A revision that's proposing that we allow a 5% increase in the building height due to the installation of mechanical equipment and screening. So I don't understand that.
Commissioner Dick, most of this would apply to cases where there's an existing building, there's a change maybe in use, so they will have a higher demand to install roof-mounted equipment, and then the building is already at building height or very close to it. So this would allow that flexibility for them to install the roof-mounted equipment and screen it properly. If a building is brand new, then it would have to be designed to meet the maximum building height, including any kind of parapet that's integrated with the building design.
Okay, so let me ask the follow-up question this way. So if there's an existing building, existing equipment on the roof, use changes, and the new owner, developer determines they need to add more equipment to the roof, higher equipment than would be allowed. And let me pose the situation this way. And let's say it's greater than this 5% height limit. In order for them to get approval to do that, would they come to the Planning Commission and request a variance? Is that the mechanism?
That is correct.
Okay, and so this provision that provides this 5%, I'll call it a fudge factor, if they were within 5%, they would not need to come and request a variance. Is that a true statement?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you for that. And then page 9, maybe following up a little bit on Commissioner Perkins' questions about balconies and roof decks. I would say this has been there's been an aspect of that that's been a sore point of mine and of the public's And it's the idea that we have a requirement for open space for development, and there's a reason for open space. And then through some clever calculations, a developer says, well, we've got these roof decks and we've got these balconies, and so we want to count that as open space. And I think our past practice was that that is not a right of the developer, but it was a discretion that was given to the Planning Commission if we wanted to allow the balconies and roof decks to be included in the calculation. So is that previous understanding of mine correct, that it was up to the Planning Commission to give discretion for the inclusion of those areas in open space?
That is correct.
Okay, and what you're clarifying here, so I'll tell you my understanding, you tell me if I'm correct. What you're clarifying here is that they are not allowed to be included in open space calculations.
That is correct. And also the deck areas, or not, I'm sorry, not the deck, but the entry or porches that are just used as an entry are not allowed to be calculated towards open space.
And is the discretion to include it or to allow a development to be approved with insufficient open space, does that discretion still lie with the Planning Commission?
Yes, that's still available through a variance. Any development standard that we include in the code, deviation from that's not listed under a minor modification or an administrative adjustment would be subject to a variance.
Okay, here's my last question. Oh, I hesitate to ask it, but I think it's appropriate. This Title 13 review that you've done, to me, seems fairly exhaustive. It covers an awful lot of ground in our municipal code. You've looked at a lot of portions of Title 13. I would venture to say you looked at every aspect of Title 13 from cover to cover in the course of preparing these revisions and edits. So my question to you is this, and it's a loaded question, but it's a serious question. In the course of you doing this work, did you encounter any language or any provisions or any evidence of systemic inequality or institutional racism in our Title 13?
I have to say, when we say it's a code cleanup, it does not mean that we've studied every section of the code. We've studied the sections that has been raised to our attention through our review or maybe direction by City Council or Planning Commission. So we really emphasized on those sections.
So I'm not asking if it exists. I'm asking if you came across anything that came to your attention as fitting that concern.
I have not.
Okay. Thank you very much. No more questions.
Hey, thank you, Commissioner Zick. Any other commissioners with questions? Okay, I will open this for the public hearing and ask if there are any members of the public that wish to ask questions on this particular item. Apart from the electronic communications we received today, please, if you are part of the participants in the Zoom webinar, click the raise your hand button. Or Ms. Green, do we have anyone on telephone who wishes to speak?
Mr. Chair, no, we do not.
Okay.
Don't see any hands raised.
Okay, so then I will close the public comment portion of the hearing. Commissioners, are there any additional questions? Vice Chair Harlan, do you have anything to add? Question-wise, are you? Apparently not.
No questions, Mr. Chair.
Okay. I have none either. So commissioners, it's your pleasure if you have additional questions of staff or anyone with a motion. There's a hand up, so I'll go with Commissioner Zick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that the Planning Commission adopt staff recommendation and find that the project is exempt from the provisions of the California Environmental Quality Act under CEQA Guidelines Section 15061B3, and recommend that the City Council give first reading to an ordinance approving the Code Amendment CO 2020-02, amending Title 13 of the Costa Mesa Municipal Code according to the staff report item.
Commissioner Zick, I would ask you if that includes the late red line amendment to the landscaping provisions.
Yes, yes. Thank you for that. It does include that.
Okay, very good. I will second that. Are there any comments? Raise your hand if you have any comments.
I do have a comment, Mr.
Vice Chair Harlan, please.
Sorry, I couldn't find my raise hand button. I wanted to add a friendly amendment to one section. And I think Manu had answered my question, so I just wanted to offer it directly. So this is on, forgive me, handwritten page 47. It's under the landscaping section as D. I'm sorry, E, very last one.
And Commissioner Harlan, if I could interrupt you real quick, I need to close the public hearing.
Sure. And
I've just done that, so go ahead.
Okay, so this is on section E. On handwritten 47, and it reads, artificial plants are prohibited, but may be installed in up to 50% of the yard area visible from the public right of way, subject to approval of the planning division. And I believe Ms. Ashabi had clarified that this is specifically supposed to refer to artificial lawn or turf. So my recommendation would be that we keep the prohibition on plants, but so it would read, artificial plants are prohibited, but artificial grass or turf may be installed up to 50%.
Maker of the motion, is that okay with you?
Let me ask a question of staff first. With that change, are there any applications that you're currently working on that would be affected by that change?
It will not affect anything.
Okay, I accept that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Harlan.
Yeah, and the second concurs. Anyone else? Commissioner Torjay and then Commissioner Perkins.
Thank you. I don't think that I would like to add the change to the matrix for group counseling, but I would like to say that in the future, considering the parking discussion, as well as the definition of the group homes with the trade and vocational schools.
Okay, I appreciate that. Commissioner Perkins.
Thanks. I just wanted to actually follow up on Commissioner Torjay's comment and also suggest that I would like to see a thorough evaluation of parking. And I have this thinking of this in two ways. I have a couple of things I'd like to mention here, but for parking, I have two things. On a smaller scale, something I've seen come up in multiple projects is the lack of scalability of our bicycle parking credit, right? You can get a credit for one parking space by installing a bike rack, but that doesn't scale the project size at all. So trying to look at some percentage of parking spaces or something like that. And on a larger scale, I agree. And I think the letter by Mr. Lingual eloquently stated, parking minimums come with a multitude of costs, making it financially not profitable for construction. So I'd like to see that explored in the future. The landscaping standards in Chapter 7 of Title 13, I think it might be valuable to reevaluate those. And there's a couple of reasons I can say that. I think the tree counts and shrub counts can be are almost ridiculously high, and also what counts as a tree or shrub is vague, and that comes from biologically speaking as well. But the requirement for there are multiple requirements and that almost don't make sense. So there's a requirement to have large box trees installed, which gives you immediate gratification, but actually is counterproductive because smaller plants. Planting trees in like a 5-gallon pot or smaller actually leads to better long-term growth and viability of the plant. The ground cover requirement, as I mentioned, can be harmful to native insects and bees. Requirement to remove litter is currently in there, and that's actually very bad for a lot of native plants, which want litter falling naturally on them, and also native insects. So I think that could be looked at. And a separate chapter that's really sort of largely outside of our purview, the section on bicycles. Title IV is woefully out of date, and I would like to request that be looked at. Sections 4-26B and D actually both contain restrictions on bicycle locations in the roadway that are in conflict with current California Vehicle Code. Section 4-27 states the Transportation Services Director is male, which is really bad. And Section 436A and C require that bikes only be locked to bike racks and allow fines and confiscation of bikes locked anywhere else. In a city where we have no requirements for that residential, commercial, or industrial facilities provide bike racks, and where probably more than half don't provide bike racks, this seems definitely unfair and inequitable given the groups that ride bikes. So again, I'd like to recommend that. So evaluation of bicycle ordinance, evaluation of landscape standards, and parking is what I would like to see in the future. Thank you very much.
Okay, Commissioner Perkins, thank you. Commissioner Tourget, did you have additional comments, or you're?
Sorry, I'll put my hand down.
Okay, very good. So first of all, thank you, commissioners, for taking a really hard look at this and for excellent questions. I just have a couple of, I have one question of staff, just generally speaking. I know we have some parking studies going on in the city, but the parking study really isn't citywide. Are we looking at just individual areas right now, or can you give me an update on parking studies? Somebody.
I believe the only parking study that's ongoing right now is going through Public Services, the Transportation Services Division, and they're looking at the on-street permit parking. So there's nothing on private property at this time.
Okay. Okay. So I think in concept, I agree with what Commissioner Perkins was saying generally about, you know, a bike rack will buy a parking stall. I think that needs to be scaled up. My general belief is, and there's some really interesting things going on with automobile industry and what's happening there, that we're going to find ourselves vastly overparked as we move along with evolution of technology and with consumer preferences about whether or not they're even going to own a car or just going to ride share everywhere or ride a bike. So longer term, and this will probably be after I'm long gone from the commission, I really think we need to figure out how to better utilize our space and our land that isn't devoted to the automobile and more to uses or housing or things like that. So I'm kind of in line with thinking on Commissioner Perkins relative to thinking about giving more parking space credit for bike racks than we do now. That's a small start, but it's a start. On the landscaping issue, I'm in favor of more green. The more green we have, the more oxygen we're pumping into the air. I've never liked that we allow artificial turf in the city. I still don't like it, but that's not a battle I'm willing to fight. I know people want to do it. I'd rather see xeriscape and DG and you know, native Southern California plant material. It doesn't involve a lot of water, but on my street, there's 3 or 4 houses that have put in artificial turf, and I don't like it. I feel like I'm going to a miniature golf course. So that's just my personal preference. I don't think it does anything for the environment. It creates heat, typically. Anyway, that's just a personal peeve of mine. Beyond that, on the land use matrix, you know, I'm lobbying several jurisdictions right now to update land use matrix to allow for new uses because I represent quote unquote evil shopping center owners who are trying to figure out what to do with their atrophying shopping centers because of brick and mortars going away. We have e-commerce, and or interesting uses for commercial spaces that aren't contemplated in a lot of land use matrices right now. So I do think we need to look at our land use matrix. I'm trying to figure out when the good spot to do that is, given everything that's going on, given the limited resources that the city has. And I'll circle back again to the housing element. I think our housing element is going to influence more than just the housing element in the general plan. I don't know that it'll influence the land use matrix that much, but that might be an opportunity to kind of look at the land use matrix in parallel, particularly if we're starting to consider upzoning purely commercial land use, purely commercial zones to maybe mixed use zones. New uses we might allow in those new mixed use zones that aren't allowed currently in our commercial zones. Specialty uses, things like that we talked about tonight. So I think to Commissioner Tourget's question, and I don't mean to lecture because she's a planner and I'm not, but I think that might be the good opportunity where we can kind of see, you know, are there centers in town that we're thinking about upzoning for purposes of the housing element? And then, so then we go to the owner and say, well, how do we keep the commercial element of that mixed use zone viable? And that the land use matrix might be, that might be the time to look at it and say, hey, maybe we can allow these particular uses in this particular zone. So I agree with you though. I think many cities have land use matrix that are horribly out of date, that were conceived originally back in the 50s, and everything's changing now. So I think we need to do that. So I'm on board with you on that. And any suggestions you have, I would be more than willing to listen. And if you need a champion to help you with that, I'm there. So I think that's all I have to say. Unless there's anybody else, I will ask Julie to call the roll on the motion.
Chair Dirical,
Aye.
Vice Chair Harlan,
Aye.
Commissioner Colbert,
Aye.
Commissioner Perkins,
Aye.
Commissioner Russell,
Aye.
Commissioner Tourget. Sorry, that was aye, correct?
Yes, aye.
Commissioner Zick.
Aye.
That motion carries 7-0.
Very good. And since that goes to the city council, no need for a appeal disclaimer. So excellent. Thank you very much, you guys. That will take us to old business item number 1.
Old business item number 1, Planning Commission discussion of systematic inequality and the formation of a subcommittee to address this topic. Please note that we have received 2 written comments from Corrine Stover and Flo Martin that has been provided to the commission and made a part of the record.
Thank you, Julie, very much. Ms. Lee, the staff report is yours.
Thank you, Chair and members of the Planning Commission. As Julie mentioned, this item is a continuation of the Commission's June 22nd discussion of systemic inequality and the formation of a subcommittee to address this topic. In the way of background, at the Planning Commission's June 8th, 2020 meeting, during Commissioner comments and suggestions, Commissioner Perkins proposed that the Commission agendize a discussion regarding this topic. After discussion, the Commission requested that staff agendize this matter for the next meeting, and the item was placed on the June 22nd agenda. At the Planning Commission meeting of June 22nd, the item was discussed, and the Commission directed staff to work with the Chair and Commissioner Perkins to develop a summary letter to the City Council requesting the formation of a Human Relations and Equity Committee and to establish a Planning Commission working group to work with the city's housing element consultant to ensure that the issues of equity and equal opportunity for housing in Costa Mesa are addressed. The Planning Commission directed staff to bring the letter back to the Commission at its next meeting, specifically regarding the formation of the committee for consideration by the entire Commission. As such, a letter was prepared and it has been provided to the Commission as attachment 1 to the staff report. That letter, as provided, is for consideration by the commission. I did want to note that we received 3 public comments at the time of the June 22nd discussion, and those were also referenced and linked in your staff report. As this item is at the pleasure of the commission, staff doesn't have a specific recommendation. However, the commission may, upon a majority vote, approve the letter as written, direct staff to revise the language, or take any other action related to the letter in its discretion. That concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Lee. Commissioners, are there any questions relative to the letter or previous action of the Planning Commission at the last meeting? This particular item is relative to the letter. I know there were some questions among commissioners with regard to the working group on housing. And I will, when we can kind of get through the letter aspects of this, I will ask staff to kind of give us a walkthrough on how the formation of the working group would work and when it would start to kick in relative to the housing element, which was the motion by, and the approved motion by the commission at the last meeting. So we'll start with the letter. Are there any commissioners who want to comment on the letter, offer suggestions, deletions, modifications, or have any questions of staff relative to the process going forward? Commissioner Torje.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I appreciate both you and Commissioner Perkins' work on this letter. I think it's very clear and succinct, describes what happened in the last 2 meetings, as well as what the request is. I do have a note, a suggestion to add on handwritten page 2, the first paragraph talking about the housing element update process. If we can add the last line where it says with specific direction to ensure equity is integrated into the housing element. If we say ensure equity is integrated into the housing element, perhaps alongside a robust public outreach effort as well. I think the only thing that I noticed as missing as part of the letter was that discussion on robust, we used the term last time, robust public outreach.
Okay, I got you. I'll work on some language, but I understand completely what you're saying.
Great, thank you.
You have any other comments?
Not right now.
Okay, great. Thank you. Commissioner Russell and then Commissioner Colbert.
Yes, first of all, I want to say thank you for putting the letter together and even coming up with the idea and suggesting that we do it. I know it took work, and I think it will move us forward. I had a quick question of staff. Does the Orange County, does the city of Costa Mesa fund the Orange County Human Relations Commission, support them financially in any way?
That's an interesting question. I don't know. Staff, anybody know if we do or not?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Russell, I'm not aware that we do. It's not something that we fund with our CDBG funds, but I will take a look and see if I can find out real quickly. Otherwise, I will let you all know.
Yeah, I don't, it seems like I don't recall seeing it as an item, and it's, I think it just points to the need for us to do something. And it seems to me that the letter is really just a starting point of a much larger conversation that needs to happen in the city. And that it's not the end of our road for, oh, we wrote the letter, we gave it to the city council, we're done now. That we, and I think that's what's kind of nice about the working group, which we'll talk about in a minute, that will help us to continue our outreach. So that was all. I just had that quick question.
Okay, great. Commissioner Colbert.
Thanks also to Commissioner Perkins for writing this letter. I have a couple of suggestions on language in the first paragraph. And I would just like to make these suggestions, and they're open to feedback. I would like to add after reprehensible killing, I would like to change that word to murder of George Floyd by Minneapolis PD in Minneapolis, Minnesota on May 25th, 2020, which will be removed this year.
Any other comments?
That's it.
So if I want to respond to that, Commissioner Colbert, because I certainly understand the reference. That was actually a conversation that I had with Commissioner Perkins. My concern with that, and I'll leave it to Mr. Preziosi and any other members of the commission, is that while I will agree certainly that Mr. Floyd's death was reprehensible, my thinking is the former officer who has been charged with that crime has not been tried and has not been convicted of the crime of murder. And so I'm very reticent to have a incorporated city in the state of California make that judgment, or a legal body of that incorporated city make that judgment prior to a trial and a conviction. Mr. Preziosi, if you have any comment.
Thank you, Chair Diaracol. I concur with that analysis. Murder is a specific legal term. He has not been, at this point, found or judged guilty of murder. Therefore, I believe it would be inappropriate for this body to refer to killing as murder at this point, since he's not been found guilty of that crime as of yet.
So, Commissioner Colbert, I do want to tell you, I completely understand why you want that language in there. I just want to make sure that we're legally smart. And so it was actually Commissioner Perkins. My language actually initially was a little softer than even reprehensible killing. And so Commissioner Perkins got on me a little bit. And so I noodled around and we came up with that. So I hope that's sufficient. I think it takes us up to a point where we can articulate our anger about what happened to Mr. Floyd without basically, in my mind, usurping the legal process that we're all entitled to, a trial by a jury of our peers. But I want to know, I respect your comment. I'm not trying to minimize them at all. Did you have any additional comments?
No, I just wanted to make that record. I felt that I would get that feedback.
Okay, well, thank you for your comment. I appreciate it. Commissioner Zick.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I would say with respect to Commissioner Colbert's concern, this is precisely why it was my feeling at our last meeting that an individual should be sending a letter expressing their concerns to either the full body of the council or individual council members, so they could express their personal feelings precisely the way they wanted to. Making this an official document from the Planning Commission, I 100% agree with the rationale for not alleging crimes that have not been adjudicated. So I would still recommend that Commissioner Colbert, you have every bit the individual right to express your concerns to council outside of whatever this happens with this letter. And I'd encourage you to do that, because the last thing we should be doing is stifling your desire to express things that you want to express in the way you want to express them. But I do have a couple of questions about the letter. And I know there hasn't been a motion yet, so maybe this would be answered if there was a motion, but I'll ask the question this way. It appears to me in the letter that there is reference to 3 different organizational groups or organizational constructs. And I identify three. I don't know if it's one, I don't know if it's two, or if it's three. The three that I've identified is, number one, a Costa Mesa Human Relations and Equity Committee. That's one organization structure that is referred to in this letter. The second organizational structure that's referred to in this letter is a subcommittee of the Planning Commission to identify systemic inequality. And in this letter, it identifies the idea of getting or changing, amending our bylaws to allow for the Planning Commission to form this subcommittee to identify systemic inequality. The third organization that I see referred to in this letter is a Planning Commission working group to work specifically on the housing element. So I know there hasn't been a motion yet, but I'm interested to understand to what extent these three individual groupings are being advocated as part of this letter. So that's the question. It doesn't have to be answered, but if anyone wants to try, that's the extent of my question.
So thank you, Commissioner Zick, for the question. Good observations. So the subcommittee was just a reference to the initial proposal made by Commissioner Perkins that the Planning Commission actually did not approve in its motion. So its reference in the letter is just more of a kind of a sequential recount of what happened at the previous meeting. And so nothing about a subcommittee relative to identifying inequality or inequity in the city's codes is on the table tonight. With respect to the Human Relations and Equity Committee, one of the, I think that was maybe was my idea. I can't remember it anymore because of my advancing age, but in lieu of the subcommittee, my idea was that if we wanted to take a more holistic, broader look at city policies, regulations, codes, fees relative to inequality and inequity, that perhaps like many jurisdictions do, we would form a Human Relations Commission or committee to do exactly what Commissioner Perkins was asking the Planning Commission to do in a subcommittee, only on a broader scale. So the commission approved that we asked the chair and Commissioner Perkins work with staff to write a letter requesting the city council form or consider forming that Human Relations Committee, Human Relations and Equity Committee. And so that's what that is. That's kind of a broader group. And the city had one before, actually commenced in '87, disbanded in 2005. And as I recall, that particular Human Relations Committee, the scope of its work wasn't nearly as weighty as I believe the work that Commissioner Perkins is envisioning for this particular committee, and that I think would probably be a good exercise for our city. As I said, we can always improve. We're not perfect at anything. And I think it's always good to kind of reflect on how we're governing ourselves and whether or not we're giving everybody a fair shake in town. Relative to the working group, as it points out in the letter, and I think that I articulated at the last meeting, I think one of the larger concerns, and Commissioner Perkins, if I'm not interpreting your intentions correctly, interrupt me and take over. Commissioner Perkins clearly, and Commissioner Colbert and all the commissioners, I think, have some interest in making sure that we have this big look at our housing policies coming up. And it seems to me in the context of, are we providing, are we creating a housing element? Do we have codes in place relative to housing? I know we'll be looking at an inclusionary zoning ordinance soon. do we have a housing policy construct in the city that provides the best possible opportunity for everyone who lives in this town to try to find and acquire affordable housing, whether it's a studio, whether it's renting a room, whether it's owning a home? So it seemed to me that to kind of address Commissioner Perkins, one of his core concerns and what I perceive to be one of the commission's core concerns about equity and housing in Costa Mesa, that the housing element would create a perfect opportunity to kind of look at equality and equity in housing as we identify potential land in Costa Mesa that we would have to upzone to create the canvas to plan for almost 12,000 housing units that is being required of us currently by SCAG and the California Department of Housing and Community Development. So the working group in my mind was really, so we didn't say, oh yeah, let's look at our housing element, our housing policies relative to inequality and inequity, and then just have it kind of fade away. But to have this group put together that would be integrally involved in the community outreach, as Commissioner Torgier reminded me about, thank you. And in the working with the consultant, working with staff to make sure that every step of the way in the housing element we're thinking about it is what we were about to do, consistent with an overarching goal to create an environment for housing in our city that allows everybody a fair shot to live here. Doesn't necessarily guarantee outcomes, but are we creating a housing element that does not create some kind of unfair advantage for one group over another? So the working group is essentially, Commissioner Zick, designed to do that. And I hope that answered your question. Commissioner Zick, if you have additional questions or comments about that, I'm happy to hear them.
No questions. I'll have comments later.
Okay, great. Thank you, sir. Commissioner Colbert. Oh, you're muted, Commissioner Colbert.
I think it was up from the first time I lowered it.
Oh, okay, perfect. Okay, anybody else have any comments? Or if not, I think Commissioner Torgier may have some language for you on the robust community outreach. So I was thinking along the lines of, in that regard, the commission discussed establishing a planning commission working group tasked with engaging staff and directly participating in the work program for the development of the sixth cycle housing element, with specific direction to engage in a robust outreach program to receive community input relative to equity and equality in housing policies implemented into the sixth cycle housing element.
Yes, there was one part of that sentence that might, wait, can I ask staff a quick question?
Of course.
Have we signed a contract for the housing element update?
Mr. Curtis.
I was waiting to see if staff would jump in, Mr. Chairman. We're taking the contract to the city council next Tuesday, so the contract wouldn't be signed until after the council approves it.
And is it I don't know if we can ask of this question, but is it within that scope to do community outreach alongside the planning commission, or would that have to be a contract amendment?
It's covered. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Yeah, so community outreach is part of the housing element update. We have an assumed number of meetings, for example, for community workshops and planning commission hearings and city council hearings. So as long as whatever we decided was fell within that umbrella of the number of meetings that we've assumed for cost purposes, it would be included in the contract.
Okay. And then Chair, did you, oh, thank you. Chair, did you mention, was it that the Planning Commission would direct the outreach of the, or that we would work alongside, or that we would conduct?
Yeah, my thinking would be is that the working group would be a part of the consulting team. So they wouldn't necessarily direct, they would advise the consulting team on this particular aspect of what they want to learn from the community. They could certainly be a part of the outreach effort and be at the town halls and the small charrettes, whatever's involved. But I think what I would like to see the working group do is sit down with the consultant and develop a framework of information gathering as a part of the overall housing element that deal with equality and inequity in housing. So I'm hoping that working group is going to be really focused on dealing with questions about this particular subject and not necessarily meddling in the whole housing element update process.
So it's not that we would be directing or advising the outreach, but providing
participating.
That we want to. Okay. And so I'm thinking with this, and this is not part of the letter, but that probably would be more than what is scoped just from knowledge of generally how housing elements are scoped and then how many planning commission meetings there are. And so I think that's, commission might be aware of that, but as we propose this, it might be something that might need to be discussed with city council in terms of that scope.
So I appreciate that very much. So I'm gonna ask for your indulgence, because I think I totally get what you want to do, and I want to do that. So obviously this meeting is public record. The staff will certainly recap for the council on presentation of this letter the importance that the commission feels, provided it's approved by the commission tonight, of this working group being involved in the outreach process, and that there is a robust outreach. There's clearly going to be a robust community outreach effort as part of the housing elements in the scope. But that the record of this meeting tonight, your comments, the rough language I read into this draft letter, I would ask that let's not include it, but let's let the staff convey it to the council. They can see it in this meeting tonight. And then we'll just kind of go from there. I just think what I see the working group being, and Commissioner Perkins, correct me if I'm wrong, I really see it being laser focused on that element that we've been talking about for the last month. And that is, we're about to revamp our housing policy in a major, major way. Let's make sure that it puts in place a construct that creates opportunities for all people that want to live in the city, an equal opportunity to have that chance. So if that's okay with you, I want to move the ball forward. That's all I want.
I totally agree.
Okay.
I'm a consultant. And so sometimes when I see, like when we propose things, or I just know that it changes the scope. And so I just want it to be as easy to streamline our process forward as possible, and for us to not put throw in unnecessary things at council. And so that's why I appreciate not saying direct or advise, because that changes their scope a lot.
So my thinking is once the housing element consultant is on board, and so then staff, I'm assuming we develop a work program. Here are the milestones, here's the schedule. Part of that work program schedule will be at a planning commission coming up, we'll have an item that says appoint 3 members to the housing element working group. And somebody can raise their hand and say, I want to be part of that group, and we can all vote on it, and they'll sit and meet with the consultant and staff to lay out that component that I talked about and off they'll go, and how that fits into the work program is up to staff and the consultant in that working group. I don't see the planning commission overall micromanaging that process.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Barry, am I giving you a heartburn when I say all that, or Jennifer?
No, Mr. Chairman, I think what you're explaining and what Commissioner Torje's questioning are in lines with what our intention were and what our understanding were from the commission.
Okay. So hopefully, Commissioner Torje, I've articulated your interest in that community outreach component without having to put it in a letter. Everybody will get it, hopefully.
Yes.
Commissioner Perkins, comments. You've raised your hand.
I think this has been dealt with, but I just wanted to clarify. You asked me to jump in on anything, and I just wanted to make sure that this working group is looking at more than just interacting with outreach, but also as that housing element is designed and developed, looking at various policies, maybe even looking at historical things, doing data analyses to ensure that equity is being addressed in all elements, but not just we're doing a little bit of outreach and that's it.
No. So don't misunderstand what I'm saying. If I'm coming across like I'm just tap dancing around to appease all you guys, I'm blowing it big time. No, we need to do what the work that so to the extent that you want to participate in that process and bring that data forward that's helpful, or at least provides us a framework of what we don't want to do again, please do that. My particular interest in the overall housing element will come to the Planning Commission at some point. Tell you the truth, I don't want to be on the working group. I think there's many bright young minds here that are ready to go and to carry the ball. And as the chair, I'm going to say, go do the work, bring it back, and let's see what you got. So, I can imagine there's at least 2 of you right now that want to be a part of it, and a third. So when we bring it back on an agenda, we'll pick the 3 and off you go. So that's all I got to say. Anybody else? Commissioner Colbert.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to get clarification. So right now we're taking suggestions for language on the letter, and then subsequent to that, are we allowed to ask questions, or will we have a line of questioning related to the actual committee?
Sir, you can add, if you can suggest language to the letter, and then you can also ask questions about the committee. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, if I can, I have a question for staff, just for the community's background. I think this might be helpful for us all. If someone from staff could just provide a bit of background on the former Human Relations and Equity Commission that was in the city, that was disbanded in 2005, what the mission of that was, and the background, just for an historical understanding of what we may be asking the council to open back up or create again.
Ms. Lee?
Thank you. I'm happy to provide some background. You'll give me one moment.
Yeah.
So there was a Human Relations Committee in the city in the past. Essentially, it was August 3rd, 1987, that the City Council established a Human Relations Committee. They did that by minute order, and that committee was specifically tasked with addressing issues referred to it by the Day Workers Task Force Subcommittee. Over time, the committee also pursued various council direction regarding education and communication between various cultures in Costa Mesa. And also the committee made recommendations to the City Council on various matters related to their purview over the years that it existed. On June 21st, 2005, the City Council removed funding that supported that committee as part of its decision on the 2005 to 2006 annual city budget. And subsequent to that decision, on July 19th, 2005, the City Council adopted a resolution to dissolve that committee, noting that they felt that it had fulfilled its responsibilities and obligations. As a result, the committee was dissolved at that time and hasn't existed in Costa Mesa since. But it was clearly a very different committee with some specific a specific purview and responsibilities at that time. What we're discussing this evening certainly sounds like something different than that, a different take perhaps.
Okay, I just want to understand, and when do we need to be, or I guess for the sake of conversation, since I guess council will watch this, when council brings this up to create this body and the direction and purpose of it, will they be using guidance from, where will they get guidance from? How will they best decide where this goes? I think some things remain unclear.
So I can take a stab at it, Commissioner Colbert, although what we're asking the council to do in this letter is to actually consider forming it, and they can decide whether or not they want to form it. So after that, my guess is at that particular meeting, they won't actually decide if they want to form it, they won't decide what it's going to do. My guess would be that they're going to want to look at other jurisdictions that have had human relations commissions and existing human relations commissions, Los Angeles, Long Beach, Riverside, all sorts of jurisdictions. They may certainly engage you, Commissioner Perkins, all those who have brought this item forward to say, what do you want it to look at? They may reach out to also the community, but they'll have to define, because it's going to be a committee, it will be a committee of the city. It'll be subject to Brown Act. It'll have to be noticed. It'll have to, I'm sure, have bylaws or what its exact scope of work will be. So this letter is really asking permission to, one, just consider it, and if you adopt it, then they'll have to come back and decide what exactly it's going to do, its scope of work, and its bylaws, and how it's going to function, and how much resource to devote to it in terms of financial resources and staff time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that clears up a little bit, and I know we're in a process kind of muddling through all of this, and that I think, to me, it's just a lot of questions. I have 1,001 questions that I have written out, and I'm sure everyone does as well. But
and young man, I can tell you right now, you've got the energy to do it. Take the ball and run with it. So.
Yeah. No. But I think that answers it, but I just wanted to kind of, state that, this is unclear. And I know like a lot of people are engaging in similar processes across the country.
Yep.
And it's all unclear to everyone. But I think we're in search of the right path, I'll say. So hopefully we get there without too much bureaucracy.
Well, I will tell you that we are certainly further down the road than we were a month ago.
Yes.
So, and that is in large part to your comments and your passions, and to Commissioner Perkins as well. So, and to all of you. Anyone else? Does anyone have a motion?
Quick question, should there be public comment?
You know what? You should be chair, Commissioner Perkins. We'll open this for public. We'll open the public hearing on this and ask if there's anyone in the public on the participants panel in the Zoom webinar if they wish to comment on this or have questions. I don't see any. Are there any? Is there anyone on the phone, Ms. Green or Ms. Colgan?
No, there is not.
Okay. Commissioner Perkins, thank you for reminding me of my duties. I will close public comment and close the public hearing on this item, and then ask if there's a motion.
I'll make a motion.
Commissioner Torje.
I will motion to actually, I should have written the motion down before I did it. But I would make a motion to send the letter to the City Council with the language addition that the chair added as part of it.
Okay, I will second that motion. And Commissioner Torje, I will go ahead and draft a little more in a little more refined manner that language tonight and drop it into the letter. And hopefully that will be okay with all of you. And then, so I've seconded the motion. Mr. City Attorney, this is a letter that is, who's the signatory of this letter? Is it the chair or all the commissioners who agree to vote on this or not?
I suggest to be the chair as the head of the committee.
Okay.
And just record the vote if it's anything less than unanimous.
Okay. Okay, so there is a motion on the floor and a second. Comments. Commissioners, raise your hand, please, if there are comments on the motion. Commissioner Colbert.
So I think I owe comments and a bit of, I'll just read my to the community.
Please do.
So I would like to say thanks to the community members for their comments on this letter and engagement throughout these past 4 meetings. These past 4 meetings have been a couple of 4 meetings that have been difficult for me, and one has taken a large toll. In June, when we decided to explore the idea presented by Commissioner Perkins of a committee that will engage in a conversation on race and racism and systemic injustice and equality, and look at our own bias here in Costa Mesa in the middle of an uprising in response to the murders of Black and brown bodies throughout the United States, I must admit I was apprehensive. In fact, I expressed my concerns regarding the potential of a plan that wouldn't be actionable, but would become a shelved document in a moment for us to feel good because we've done something. My concern still stands, but I hope I am wrong. I appreciate this opportunity that we've extended to broaden the study beyond the commission to a more holistic review. As an African-American, more specifically a Black male, this process feels different for me. I imagine this process might feel different from all of my colleagues, with the exception of my female peers. This is not to negate or dismiss the experiences of white men, but to articulate that in spite of those experiences, being white and male in America has been the default of being in the experiences of liberties of America guaranteed in those founding documents written so long ago. During the last meeting, as we began to wrangle with the language of what equity and bias meant in Costa Mesa, I felt a sensation that was inexplicable to me. In fact, I froze at a number of moments and I wanted to walk away for a bit. If I'm honest, I didn't sleep well that night because as I processed the feelings of what was taking place, I began to recognize that I was in the midst of reckoning with the language of a process that would or could potentially define the future experiences for all people, but particularly Black and brown people and other marginalized communities in Costa Mesa, which led to my extension. This committee is important to me, and I'm sure everyone on this commission, given that we are taking this on, but we must ensure that what we are setting forth does something intentional and meaningful for those existing and those to come. I also abstained because while I want this process to move forward, I didn't believe that a vote was required for what justice for all looks like. It's an inalienable right, but then I must realize that I was not included in those guarantees set forth by our founding fathers. In 1864, we passed the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery in America. In 1868, we passed the 14th Amendment, which nullified the Dred V. Scott decision and granted formerly enslaved Americans that descended from Africa citizenship and equal protection. And subsequently, in 1870, 8 African-American men were granted the right to vote, but it was not until 1964, almost 100 years from abolishment, when those efforts were fully realized. My life and the life of so many others that look like me had to be legalized and voted upon. And while that is what the democratic process is, I kind of felt like that's where we were headed during our last meeting, and I didn't want to be a part of that process. However, I recognize that we are still in the midst of reconciling those documents, and I must have, when I have nothing else in me, the audacity of hope and change. But from what to what? I guess that's what we'll be deciding. I've had several conversations since that meeting, and I hope that this commission and our council, and that body rather, will in fact develop actionable items that improve upon the experiences of all people, but especially those of Black and brown people in Costa Mesa. It is not lost upon me that I note one more difference than in 1864, and it's that I sit shoulder to shoulder, or rather screen to screen, with you in a space that was not designed for me in a country built by my ancestors. This is not just another vote, it's about life or death. Commissioner Perkins, thank you again for bringing this before this body. To my fellow commissioners, thank you for engaging so deeply and taking this so seriously. Tonight, I will be supporting the motion, and I ask that council take this recommendation to create a committee and the recommendations that are to come forth seriously and with action. Changing Costa Mesa means changing Orange County, and I'm proud to be a part of that catalyst with each and every one of you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Colbert, thank you very much. Commissioner Zick.
Well, it's hard to follow that. I'll be honest. It's been a difficult day for me as I've been thinking about this item, knowing one thing for certain, and that there's 6 votes locked in for this item. And the question I've been struggling with is, how do I show support without simply going along to get along? And what is it that I'm supporting? One thing is crystal clear to me, and that is that when Commissioner Perkins brought this up, and when I had a separate discussion with Commissioner Colbert a month ago, it couldn't have been clearer to me that there was 100% sincere passion and interest in addressing change. Couldn't have been clearer. It was sincere. It wasn't bureaucracy. It wasn't let's form a committee. Let's go, put my stamp on the political, influence. And it wasn't any of that. It was, I got something I'm seriously concerned about and something I seriously want to address. And what I gathered out of Commissioner Perkins' presentation was that what he wanted to hit head on was an in-depth look at everything in the city from the standpoint of systemic inequality. And what I hear from Commissioner Colbert is something very similar, but maybe even a little more pointed. Not just systemic inequality as a general concept, but more specifically as it relates to him and people like him that he identifies with. And what I'm concerned about is that in some respects, we've gotten away from that as a central core seed for this. And we're on to something called the Human Relations Equity Committee. I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned that what we've done is we've come up with the title for a book, and then we're going to kick it over to City Council and say, find somebody to write the book. We just got the title. In fact, form the committee, don't even charter them with what they're going to be responsible for. Just see who wants to be on it, let them figure out what they're going to work on. And to me, as a planning commissioner, I feel that's an irresponsible thing to do. To send something that ambiguous up to City Council, where they basically have to start from scratch and figure out, well, what in the world is the intention of the Planning Commission? What is it that we're really trying to accomplish here? I want to go and support what Commissioner Perkins started. I want to support what Commissioner Colbert has so eloquently articulated. But to simply say we should have a human relations committee to go do good stuff, I'm sorry, I've seen too many teams of people fail because they have not had a clear mission, a clear purpose, a clear measurable objective. How do you know when they're done? They just keep meeting and going on forever. No, we want something specific, but we haven't identified what that is. I can't support sending something like this up to City Council as an official planning commissioner, which is why I so strongly recommended last time that Commissioner Perkins express his concerns to a council member to find a sponsor, or to the entire council looking for somebody willing to sponsor what he was interested in accomplishing. And similarly, to the extent that Commissioner Colbert has a passionate concern of issues that he wants to see addressed and not forgotten, I would say articulate those directly to council so they understand you, not so that that's going to be somehow fleshed out later once this committee gets formed. No, you want to hit the nail on the head, hit the nail on the head. Just don't hope somebody brings a hammer. Now I'm sorry. I support the passion that the commissioners have on this, but I can't support the ambiguity. I can't take a position that says, well, I'm really excited to see where this thing goes. Like I'm getting on a train or a bus and I don't know what the destination is, but I'm really looking forward to the ride. Sorry, I don't operate that way. I want to lead something in a direction. I want to see that something is led in a direction. This doesn't do it. This kicks the can to council. I support sincerely the interests that each of you have individually for what you want to see done. Somebody wants to see affordable housing and they think that's the big focus of what needs to be done. I support affordable housing. I don't support dumbing down housing, making poor quality housing so it's cheap, so it's affordable. That's not what I'm interested in. We want a quality environment. We want quality homes. We want people to be able to have the same pride and ownership or their home that you and I have, not build something substandard just so they can afford it and feel like they've got something. That's not equity. I'm not interested in doing that. Equal opportunity, yeah, not equal outcome. The chairman was right. We don't guarantee outcomes. This country doesn't guarantee outcomes. They guarantee equal opportunity. That's not in here. So I probably would have made more sense if I'd have made prepared comments, but I support your passions. I can't support the letter. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Torje and then Commissioner Colbert, do you have additional comments? Okay. Commissioner Torje.
Yeah, I just wanted to have a quick recap and just understanding. So we got to the letter because we had originally proposed to have a planning commission subcommittee to address issues of structural inequality and racism within the zoning code. And as part of the conversation, realized that it's a larger issue and that from top to bottom, we wanted to address inequality in the city, but that is not the purview of the Planning Commission. So I would just, as a comment on this, I think one of the reasons why we create something to send to City Council, because I really feel Commissioner Zick's comments, I empathize with them a lot in terms of like the desire to have something structured and developed that we create and build and give. But I also understand that I am not an elected official. I'm an appointed representative. And so where we can do work, I support us doing work. And so I obviously am supporting my motion, but I wanted to acknowledge that there was steps to get here, but also no, it's not the fullest it could be. Sorry, not that it's the fullest it could be, but it's not the fullest that I would wish it to be, but I'm not an elected official.
Understood. Okay, Commissioner Perkins.
Just wanted to thank everyone for their comments. I'm so proud of this group that we're having this discussion and we're moving this ball forward. I think as a city, it speaks highly of us as there's so much that we need to do, and formation of a committee is not the most exciting thing, but it's moving the ball forward. It's trying to find that path through the jungle, through this vast unknown that so many of us are facing right now. I think the search for justice, for equity, for all is key to our future as a society. Our history is shameful, it's more than shameful, it's terrible. And that history and our history of injustice towards so many groups has led to massive inequalities between groups that we still see today, wealth gaps, it's so much between sexes, between races, between ethnic groups, between so much more. And we as a nation, we as a city, we as individuals, we need to do whatever we can to correct these inequities, these gaps that were created through our history, have carried on to this day, and will carry on through the future if we do not act. And so that, I would say for Commissioner Zick, is the goal of this Human Relations and Equity Committee, is overall to ensure that all people are treated equitably in the city, meaning to try to identify and correct historical inequalities and injustices and ensure that everyone is in the future, hopefully someday, equal, truly. Regarding the mission, this is, as Commissioner Torres said, this was envisioned initially as a, hey, let's just form this as a subcommittee of the Planning Commission, and then we very quickly realized this touches so many areas of the city, everything from policing and transportation and parks. Every element of the city is touched on this, that it really feels like the details of formation and other operational details logically fall outside of our purview, logically fall with the council, the city council who is elected to oversee this city and deal with these types of issues. But I do feel that we have tried to give them some guidance here. So to read from the end of our letter, when we talk about requesting formation of this Human Relations and Equity Committee, we say that it should be chartered. We give them some suggestions on a mission. That it should be chartered to exercise its vigilance in identifying systemic inequity in the policies, ordinances, and regulations of our city government, and to promote tolerance, inclusiveness, equity, and equality among all members of the Costa Mesa community. And I would hope that that would give enough guidance to say that is what we are envisioning. And obviously it is up to the members of the council to ultimately decide and to make sure that this group is not just a nameplate and something that we say we fund, but that it really has teeth and that it can actually and does actually address and fix these issues that are systemic to our entire nation, but that we maybe can help with just a little bit in our time. So thank you for the support. Thank you for the great discussion. And I hope this is just the very first step on a very long and undoubtedly exceptionally difficult, but hopefully very worthwhile journey. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner Perkins. I just want to thank you for working with me and being understanding with my little quirks and working through some language issues. You've been very helpful to me and I appreciate your perspective. I want to specifically recognize you, Commissioner Colbert. I took some time over the last couple of weeks to really take an in-depth look at who you are and your resume and your background. You are an impressive young man. And we are fortunate to have you in Costa Mesa. We are fortunate to have you on this commission. You're going to be a leader in this community for a very long time if you choose to be. And I think you're a shining example of what members of the Black community can achieve in this society and in our community if they apply themselves despite the odds. So I want to congratulate you on all you have achieved. And I just want to let you know I respect you and I'm really happy you're part of the commission and appreciate all your perspective. So thank you very much. With that, I'm going to ask Julie to call the roll on the motion.
Chair Dericle?
Aye.
Vice Chair Harlan?
Aye.
Sorry, was that aye?
Aye.
Okay, thanks. Commissioner Colbert?
Aye.
Commissioner Perkins?
Aye.
Commissioner Russell?
Aye.
Commissioner Torje?
Aye.
Commissioner Zick?
No.
That motion carried 6-1 with Commissioner Zick voting no.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Staff, I'll have some revised language for that one paragraph on the letter, and I'll get it out to you tomorrow. So won't be materially different than anything I read tonight. Report, public services report. Mr. Mejia, anything tonight?
No reports tonight, Mr. Chairman.
Development services report, Mr. Curtis, and if I might have you update us on One Metro.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Just quickly, as you recall, the One Metro West project came before the commission. Kind of lost track of days. I think it was in May that the commission made its recommendation. The item ultimately also went to the County Airport Land Use Commission for its determination for consistency with the airport environment's land use plan for the John Wayne Airport, and they made that finding. During that period of time, kind of in early June, the applicant reached out to staff and indicated that with the city very much focused on the city's budget and impacts to the budget related to COVID-19 and other issues related to businesses reopening in the community and business assistance related to COVID-19, and the fact that the meetings were being held, somewhat remotely, the applicant requested that the item not move forward to the city council until later in the year, or maybe even potentially the beginning of next year. They felt that the city had other priorities at this time, and they didn't think it was appropriate to move forward to the council yet. So the item has been sort of not technically tabled, but effectively tabled by the applicant. When they reach out to us that they're ready to move the project forward, we will need to relook at it to see and ensure that all of the documents and all of the analysis is still up to date and still timely. If not, some changes and updates may be required. But just basically wanted to let you know that it's been delayed and going to the city council. Once the applicant's ready for it to move forward, we'll evaluate where we are to determine if there's additional analysis required or not, and move the project forward, or even probably in a worst case for the applicant, have to reduce some items in some of their particularly environmental documents, and potentially worst case even have to come back to the planning commission, although I'm sure the applicant is hoping to avoid that if possible.
Anything else, sir?
That's it on that project, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. City Attorney, Mr. Preziosi, any report tonight?
No, Chair, the article, I have no report.
Okay. Commissioners, thank you all very much. Brenda, thank you. Julie, thank you. Jennifer, Manu, Bart, Barry, thank you all for your indulgence with us tonight and for the conversation. And I appreciate all of you, and we will stand in adjournment until our regularly scheduled meeting of July 27th. Good night all.